In 1853, a man walked out of a California gold mine after 8 months underground, and his lungs never worked right again. He was 32 years old. He thought he had a cough. He did not have a cough. Welcome to Mystery Wild West. And what you're about to hear is the part of the gold rush nobody put on the posters. If this is the kind of history that tells you what it actually cost, subscribe. Most channels stop at the gold. We don't. And before we go further, do you have any family history of lung disease or anyone who worked in mines or heavy industry? Tell us in the comments. Because what happened inside those tunnels was not an accident. It was a system that knew the cost and paid it with other people's bodies. Now, the myth is clean and bright. A man with a pan, a river, the sun on his face, pulling gold from the earth with his own hands. Freedom, reward for effort. The dream made physical? That is the image that sold a generation on the gold rush. That is the image that filled the trails west with men who believed that the right amount of work in the right place at the right time would change their lives forever. Some of it was true. The gold was real. But the work inside the mines, the actual, physical, daily reality of what a man's body went through to get that gold out of the earth, was something the posters did not show, could not show, because if they had shown it accurately, fewer men would have come, and the richest men in the territory needed the men to keep coming. So the posters showed the gold, not the lungs. Here is where it starts, not in the mines themselves, but in the decision to go underground in the first place. The early gold rush years, 1848, 1849, were dominated by placer mining, panning in rivers, sluicing creek beds, a man working with water and gravity and patience, pulling flakes and occasionally nuggets from sediment that had been accumulating for thousands of years. This was hard work, backbreaking and cold and often disappointing, but it was outdoor work, fresh air, moving water. A man's body could take it. Then the surface gold ran out. Not all at once, gradually, then suddenly. By the early 1850s, the easily accessible placer deposits in California's rivers were depleted enough that individual miners working alone could no longer make a living wage from them. The gold was still there. It was just deeper. It was in the rock. And getting it out of the rock required something completely different from panning a river. It required going underground. A miner in Grass Valley, California, in 1852, makes a decision. The creek he has been working for 6 months is giving him almost nothing now. He has heard that a new hard rock operation is hiring in the hills above town. The pay is daily wages, not the gamble of finding your own claim, but guaranteed money for guaranteed work. He needs the money. He takes the job. He goes underground for the first time on a Tuesday morning. The tunnel is low enough that he has to bend his neck to walk. It is dark except for a candle he carries. The air is thick and smells of wet rock and something he cannot name. The walls are close. The ground is uneven. He follows another man who has been doing this for a year, and that man moves through the dark like it is nothing. And the new miner tries to move the same way, and he does not quite manage it yet. Within a week, the tunnel feels normal to him. That normalization is the first danger, and it is not the last. The work itself was violent in a mechanical sense. Hard rock mining meant drilling into stone by hand, loading the drilled holes with black powder, and blasting, then shoveling the broken rock, the muck they called it, into carts and hauling it out, then drilling again. The cycle repeated for the length of every shift, which ran 8 to 10 hours, sometimes 12. The drilling was done with a steel drill bit and a hammer. Two-man teams in many operations. one man holding the drill, rotating it slightly between strikes, and one man swinging the hammer, back and forth all day in a space barely large enough to stand. Think about that for a moment. One man holds a steel rod against rock. Another man swings a hammer at it, inches from the first man's hands. Hour after hour, in the dark, in a space where a misplaced swing cannot be corrected. Accidents happened. They happened regularly. They happened in ways that the industry did not track carefully and did not publicize at all. A missed swing, a drill bit that shattered under impact and sent fragments across a man's face, a charge that went off too soon or did not go off when it should have, and was approached by a miner who assumed it was dead. Fingers, hands, eyes, these were the small common injuries that men carried out of the mines and quietly absorbed as part of the cost of the work. The larger accidents, a tunnel collapse, a flooding event, a major premature blast, these killed men outright and occasionally made the newspapers. But the small injuries, the ones that took a finger here or permanently damaged an eye there, these were invisible. The man kept working. He could not afford not to. There was no compensation, no sick pay, no system that caught him when he fell. He kept working with 8 fingers instead of 10, or with one eye instead of 2, because the alternative was no wages at all. A miner loses the tip of his index finger on a Wednesday afternoon in 1857. He wraps it in cloth, finishes his shift, and is back underground Thursday morning. He does not report it. There is nothing to report to. He does not rest. There is no rest available. The wound heals poorly because the conditions underground are not clean, and his hands are never fully clean, and the cloth wrapping gets wet and dirty within hours. The finger heals crooked. He uses it the rest of his life without ever quite getting used to how it feels. That was a normal week in a hard rock mine. But here is the problem. The injuries you could see were not the worst ones. The worst ones were the ones happening inside, slowly, that a man could not feel at first and could not see at all, and by the time he understood what was happening, it was already too late to stop it. Silicosis. The word did not exist in common usage in the 1850s and 60s. The condition did. It happened when a man inhaled fine rock dust, specifically quartz dust, over a period of months and years. The dust particles entered the lungs and lodged there permanently. The body treated them as foreign objects and built scar tissue around them. Over time, that scar tissue accumulated and replaced the healthy, flexible tissue of the lung with something rigid and airless. A lung slowly turning to stone. It did not happen fast. That was part of what made it so dangerous. A man who started underground work at 25 might not notice anything seriously wrong with his breathing until his mid-30s. By then, a decade of silica exposure had already done damage that could not be undone. The cough that developed was chronic but manageable at first, just a cough, easily attributed to dust or cold or the underground damp. The shortness of breath came later, first on exertion, then on moderate activity, then finally at rest. A miner in Nevada in 1868 tells his bunkmate that he gets winded walking uphill. He is 38 years old. He has been underground for 11 years. His bunkmate, who is 24 and has been underground for 2 years, nods and says nothing, because he does not yet know what that winding means. The older man knows, or suspects, but does not say it. There is nothing to say. There is nothing to do about it. He goes underground the next morning, because that is what you did. The drilling process was the primary source of silica exposure. Dry drilling, which was the standard practice through most of the mining boom, threw enormous amounts of fine quartz dust directly into the air of the tunnel. Every time a drill bit struck quartz-bearing rock, invisible particles filled the already limited air supply. A man drilling for 8 hours was breathing this air the entire time. The candle he carried for light consumed oxygen and added combustion products to the mix. By the end of a shift, the air in an active tunnel was a mixture of rock dust, candle smoke, black powder, residue from blasting, and whatever gases the rock itself released. Men worked in this every day. There was a partial solution available even in that era. Wet drilling, applying water to the drill point to suppress dust, significantly reduced the amount of silica released into the air. Some operations used it, many did not. Water added complexity. It slowed the work slightly. It made the tunnels wetter and colder. The men working the drills preferred dry drilling because it was faster, and they were paid by productivity in some operations. The mine owners preferred whatever was cheaper and faster. Wet drilling cost more to implement, so in most mines, through most of the gold rush era, men drilled dry and breathed the results. Now ask yourself this. If you had been a miner in 1855 and someone told you that the dust from the rock you were drilling would slowly destroy your lungs over the next 15 years, would you have kept drilling? Most people want to say no. Most people want to believe they would have walked away. But walk away to what? The alternative was poverty. The alternative was returning to wherever you came from with nothing after months or years of investment in the journey west. The alternative was admitting that the dream had not worked. And in a world without social safety nets, without any system to catch a man who stopped earning, the risk of a slow lung disease 15 years from now was a more abstract danger than the immediate certainty of no income today. So they drilled, they all drilled, they breathed the dust, and 15 years later, the consequences arrived. The timeline of silicosis created a specific and cruel pattern in mining communities. Young men came into the mines healthy, strong. They worked hard and felt fine for years and sent money home and built lives. Then, in their late 30s or early 40s, a cough that had been background noise became something more persistent. Breathing that had been easy became effortful. Work that had been routine became exhausting in a way that rest did not fix. The body was failing, and the work that had caused the failure was the same work that the man still depended on for income. A man cannot easily stop mining when his lungs are going. If mining is the only skill he has, and the town he lives in exists only because of the mine, so he keeps going, slower, more breathless, doing lighter work if the mine allows it, pushing carts instead of drilling, sorting rock on the surface instead of going underground, but staying in the industry because the industry is all there is. A mining foreman in Colorado in 1874 watches one of his older drillers struggle with a cart on the surface. The man is 41. He was one of the best drillers the foreman has ever seen. Now he stops to rest after 20 yards of flat ground. The foreman says nothing. He reassigns the man to surface sorting work, where the dust is less and the air is better. Not out of compassion exactly, but because the man is still functional and experienced and worth keeping. The driller knows what the reassignment means. He takes it without comment. He will work another 3 years before he cannot work at all. But it gets worse. Because silicosis did not just destroy lungs on its own, it made everything else worse too. A lung damaged by silica scarring loses its ability to clear bacteria and other pathogens effectively. The same cellular mechanisms that normally protect the lungs from infection are compromised by the ongoing inflammatory response to silica particles. The result was dramatically elevated rates of tuberculosis among miners. Tuberculosis, consumption as it was called, was already present in mining communities at high rates because of the crowded living conditions, the poor nutrition, and the generally worn-down state of the men's immune systems. But in miners with silica-damaged lungs, TB progressed faster and more severely than in people without that underlying damage. The combination of silicosis and tuberculosis was called miners' phthisis in the era. It was common enough to have a name. That fact alone tells you something. A doctor in a California mining town in 1863 sees 3 men in 1 week with the same presentation: chronic cough, blood in the sputum, difficulty breathing, dramatic weight loss. He knows what it is. He has been seeing it for years. He tells each man to stop working underground. He knows none of them will. He prescribes rest and fresh air because that is what the medical understanding of the time recommends, and because there is nothing else to prescribe. One of the 3 men takes the advice and leaves the mines. The other 2 keep working. The one who leaves lives another 11 years. The other 2 are dead within 18 months. The doctor writes nothing down about this. There is no reporting system. There is no record. These men vanish from the data the way working people always vanished from the data in that era. Quietly, without documentation, without acknowledgement. And this is where things change, because the mine owners knew. Not in the precise clinical sense that modern medicine would understand. But they knew that miners coughed. They knew that miners got sick at rates that other workers did not. They knew that men who had been underground for years aged faster and died younger than men who had done other kinds of work. This was visible. It was not hidden. It was just not discussed in any public way that might affect the labor supply, because the labor supply was the thing that mattered most. If men understood, clearly and fully, what working in a hard rock mine would do to their bodies over a decade, fewer men would work in hard rock mines. Fewer workers meant higher wages to attract them. Higher wages meant lower profit. Lower profit was not acceptable to the men at the top of the system who were getting very rich from the gold that other men's ruined lungs were extracting from the rock. So the information stayed vague, unofficial, passed mouth to ear among miners themselves, in bunkhouses and saloons, in the half-understood language of men who knew something was wrong but did not have the medical vocabulary to name it precisely. The cough, the breathlessness, the way a man who had been underground 10 years looked 20 years older than he was. Miners knew this. They talked about it. But there was no formal acknowledgement, no system that said, "This work will shorten your life, and here is the evidence." A miner in his late 20s sits in a saloon in Nevada in 1865, listening to an older miner at the next table cough into a cloth. He has heard that cough from other men. He has been underground 2 years himself. He looks at the older man and thinks something he does not say out loud. He orders another drink. He goes underground the next morning. What was he thinking? Probably some version of, "That will not be me." Maybe some version of, "I will not stay long enough for it to matter." Maybe just the simple, necessary human capacity for not looking at a thing you cannot change. He stayed 8 more years. Now let us talk about the other thing the body went through that never appears in the gold rush legend. The underground environment itself, separate from the dust. Mines were cold, not uniformly. Deep mines in some geological formations ran warm, even hot, from geothermal activity, but most hard rock mines in the American West during the Gold Rush era were cold, not the sharp, dry cold of winter above ground, but the wet, penetrating cold of stone and groundwater. A man working in a mine wore what he had, which was usually not enough. He sweated during heavy work, stopped sweating when he stopped moving, and that wet clothing against cold stone pulled heat from the body with consistent efficiency. Rheumatism, joint inflammation that we would today recognize as a form of arthritis or related connective tissue damage, was extraordinarily common among miners. The combination of cold, damp conditions and heavy physical work involving repetitive joint stress created exactly the conditions for chronic joint pain to develop and worsen over time. Men in their 30s and 40s who had worked underground for years moved with the stiffness and deliberateness of men decades older. Knees, hips, wrists from the drilling, shoulders from the shoveling. The joints accumulated damage that the body could not repair fast enough in conditions that made recovery difficult. A miner in his mid-30s in Arizona in 1870 wakes up before his shift and spends 10 minutes just getting his hands to open and close properly. The knuckles are swollen. The wrists are stiff. He soaks them in warm water if he has it, which he often does not. He goes to work. By mid-shift, the joints have loosened somewhat from the activity. By the end of the shift, they are swollen again. This is every day, has been every day for 2 years. He expects it will be every day for as long as he works. He is correct. The eyes were another thing the mine took. Candlelight and later lamplight in underground mines was dim, flickering, and directional. Men worked in this light for years, their eyes constantly adjusting between the bright point of a flame and the surrounding darkness, their vision strained by trying to see work that required precision. Where to place a drill, how to evaluate rock, where the edge of a platform ended, in conditions that were fundamentally inadequate for the task. Eye strain was chronic. Headaches from eye strain were a daily feature of many miners' lives. And then there were the accidents specific to light. A candle blown out by a draft, a lamp knocked over during a blast, a man suddenly in complete darkness in a tunnel where the walls were close and the floor was uneven and the next step might be a shaft that dropped 40 feet. This was not hypothetical. It happened. Men who survived it did not discuss it in terms of trauma. They discussed it in terms of what they did next. Felt along the wall, moved slowly, found their way back. The pragmatism was not a coping strategy. It was the only option available. Being afraid underground served no practical function. So men stopped being afraid, or they stopped working underground, or the fear lived somewhere very quiet inside them, and they never gave it room to grow because there was no room to spare. A young miner, new to underground work in 1859, is in a tunnel when the lamp of the man ahead of him goes out. Complete darkness. Absolute. He stands still. He can hear the other man moving forward, feeling the wall. He does the same. He follows the sound. It takes 7 minutes to reach the shaft bottom where other light exists. Those 7 minutes are not something he talks about afterward. He goes back underground the next day. He doesn't talk about it then either. But that evening, eating, he is very quiet. And this is the kind of damage that left no mark in any record. The body absorbs fear the same way it absorbs dust, slowly, over time, in ways that do not show immediately and are very difficult to connect to a single cause years later. The men who worked underground for a decade came out of it shaped by the experience in ways they could not fully articulate, shorter tempers sometimes, difficulty sleeping in open spaces, unusual stillness in some men, unusual restlessness in others. None of this was documented. None of it was treated. It was just part of what a man was after the mines. Let us come back to what the body actually looked like, because there is a physical picture here that is worth holding clearly. A man who had worked in hard rock gold mines for 10 years, in the 1860s or 70s, in the American West, was likely to present with some combination of the following: a chronic cough that was productive, meaning it brought things up and worse in the morning; reduced lung capacity that made hard physical exertion more difficult than it should have been for his age; joint stiffness and swelling; worst in the hands and wrists, knees, and lower back; hearing damage from the repeated concussive shock of drilling and blasting; partial deafness was common enough that miners developed specific communication habits in noisy environments; skin damage from sun exposure above ground; chemical exposure from ore processing; and general abrasion from years of rough physical work; eyes that had been strained for so long that they often showed visible damage. None of this was dramatic. None of it looked like the aftermath of a single catastrophic event. It was the accumulated cost of years of work in conditions that the human body was not designed to handle on an ongoing basis. Here is something that almost nobody gets right about this era. The men who suffered this damage were not, for the most part, the desperado gamblers and drifters of the popular imagination. Many of them were family men. Men who had come west specifically because they had responsibilities, a wife somewhere, children, parents who needed money sent home. Men who could not afford to stop working because stopping working meant people they loved went without. The mine took their bodies. The mine knew it. The people who owned the mines knew it. And the men kept working because the men had no other viable option, and because the alternative to working was a kind of suffering that was more immediate and more visible than the slow damage accumulating in their lungs. A man sends a letter home to his wife in Ohio from a mining camp in California in 1861. He tells her he is well. He tells her the work is hard, but the pay is steady. He tells her he will be home in another year, maybe 2, with enough money to buy the land they talked about. He does not tell her about the cough that has been getting worse since spring. He does not tell her about the way his knees ache in the morning, or the headaches that come at the end of a long shift in the tunnel. He does not tell her these things because telling her would frighten her, and because there is nothing she could do about it from Ohio, and because he needs her to believe he is coming home the same man who left. He sends the letter. He goes back underground. 2 years later, he comes home. He has the money. He buys part of the land. He is 36 years old, and he looks closer to 50. His wife notices something different in the way he breathes when he carries things. She does not ask directly. He does not explain. They plant their first crop in the spring. He coughs through the planting. Now, here is the final question worth sitting with. By the time the gold rush era wound down in the 1870s and 80s, and the big mining operations consolidated under corporate ownership with actual capital behind them, some improvements in mine safety did begin to appear. Wet drilling became more common in some operations. Better ventilation systems were installed in some mines. But here is the thing. These improvements came not because the industry had a change of heart about the men working for it, but because the cost of constantly replacing dead and disabled workers eventually became a business problem. When you have to train a new man every few years because the previous one is too sick to work, that costs money. When a tunnel collapses and kills 12 men, and you have to shut down operations for a week, that costs money. Safety improvements, when they came, were primarily a response to the economics of labor replacement, not to the value of the men themselves. That is an uncomfortable truth. It does not fit the story of progress that most histories prefer to tell, but it is what the record shows. A mine manager in Colorado in 1879 installs a basic ventilation system in the main tunnel. It significantly reduces the dust concentration during drilling. The drillers notice the difference immediately. The air is cleaner, breathing is easier. The end-of-shift headaches are less severe. They do not know that the manager installed it because the company calculated that reduced silica exposure would extend the working life of each driller by an estimated 3 to 4 years, which meant fewer replacements, which meant lower training costs, which meant better returns. They just know the air is better. And they are grateful, because that is what a decade underground does to a man's expectations. Not good air, just better air than yesterday. That is enough. That is what you hope for. The gold rush made some men very rich, a small number of them, the men who owned the land, the equipment, the processing facilities, and eventually the consolidated mining corporations that replaced the individual claims. Those men's wealth is documented. Their names appear in the history books and on the buildings they funded with their fortunes. The men who went underground and breathed the dust and drilled the rock and came out 10 years later with ruined lungs and stiff joints and partial deafness, those men are mostly unnamed. Their damage is unrecorded. Their shortened lives left no monuments. They are in the aggregate of labor statistics, if those statistics were even kept, which in many cases they were not. They built the wealth of the gold rush with their bodies, and the gold rush consumed those bodies as efficiently as the quartz dust consumed their lungs. Slowly, quietly, without acknowledgement. That is what happened to your body working in a gold mine, and now you know what the posters left out.